Shanghai's vice mayor says he will promote tour groups from his city coming to Taiwan. But will they materialize?
It's International Migrant Day, and here outside Taiwan's Labour Ministry, activists are urging the government to do more to protect the country's migrant workers.
Taiwan's top court is scrambling to fill 7 open spots, and nominees are in the hot seat as legislators grill them on some of the most controversial issues in the country, including the death penalty.
Plus,
解严以后，那时候是很乱，但是就是那种你在那个地方去，我们可以高谈阔论的时候，那个自由感，让大家觉得很放松。
a traditional restaurant that played a key role in Taiwan's democratic transition is set to close down.
Good evening and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. Shanghai's vice mayor says he will push for tour groups from his city to visit Taiwan. That announcement was made during an annual goodwill forum between Taipei and Shanghai, and it's being hailed as a positive step in cross-strait relations. Cadence Quaranta reports.
Speaking at this year's Taipei-Shanghai Twin Cities Forum, Shanghai's vice mayor said he hoped more Shanghai residents would visit Taipei.
上海方面将积极推动上海居民赴台团队游，旅游路线一定会包含台北市。
Citing worsening relations, Beijing stopped issuing its tourists permits to visit Taiwan in 2019. Soon after, pandemic-era travel restrictions were imposed and cross-strait tourism ground to a halt. And as of 2024, Chinese tourists from just one province are allowed to visit 2 of Taiwan's outlying islands, Jinmen and Matsu, a move seen as an olive branch from China amid increasingly tense cross-strait relations. Taiwan, meanwhile, has allowed individual tourism to China, but not group tours, a policy that's led to a tit for tat, with China's Taiwan Affairs Office saying it might consider lifting its ban on tourists to Taiwan if Taipei allows groups to visit China. The ongoing deadlock and resulting drop in tourism has hit some local economies hard, with many in the industry happy to see any thaw in relations.
非常的开心，业者也都准备好。 来接待我们大陆的旅客，希望我们的政府能够尽速的解除台湾就是旅行社赴大陆的禁团令，因为这样子可以让两边的观光旅游可以朝正常的发展。
It's still not clear if tourism from Shanghai will materialize. And even if it does, it won't bring Chinese tourism to popular sites like Taipei 101 behind me back up to pre-pandemic numbers. But still, some in Taiwan are saying the announcement may be a move in the right direction, a positive step in cross-strait relations. James Lin, Alex Chen, and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's former President Ma Ying-jeou is on his way to China for the second time this year.
我想在现在这个阶段呢，两岸青年互相交流是格外重要的，尤其是在全球战争频仍，两岸关系远较我们执政时期紧张。
Now Ma's leading a group of Taiwanese students to the Harbin Ice Festival in northeast China and to Sichuan province. Ma's foundation recently brought Chinese students on a tour of Taiwan, and that sparked controversy when one of the students referred to Taiwan's baseball team as China Taipei. Now, with the prospect of Shanghai tour groups coming to Taiwan and former President Ma Ying-jeou heading to China, the government here has a flurry of questions to answer. Chris Gorn went to the Mainland Affairs Council, that's the office that governs Taiwan's cross-strait relations, to find out more. Chris, what did the MAC have to say?
Well, yes, you're right, Eric. The MAC had a lot more cross-strait news to deal with than it would in a normal week. Of course, the big story is yesterday's announcement from the Shanghai vice mayor that he hopes that tour groups from Shanghai will be able to come and visit Taiwan. Now, just as a reminder, China has actually cut off all group tours to Taiwan since 2019, and Taiwan has actually done the same. Taiwanese tour groups also cannot visit China at the moment. So here's what they had to say about that issue.
不是只有上海是在 双城论坛讲话就算数啊，也不是国台办讲话就算数，因为根据陆方的法律，这个是要由文旅部来公告啊。第四，那政府重申欢迎陆客来台观光的立场不变。
Now, essentially what the MAC is saying there is that until China's Ministry of Culture and Tourism approves any new policy change, it remains a hypothetical. And the MAC is not too clear on what this policy might actually look like. And they're not the only ones. You know, I took a look at some Chinese social media comments today to see what they were saying. And there was a lot of comments showing excitement at the possibility that they may be able to come and visit Taiwan, maybe see some Chinese family members who are living here. At the same time, there was a bit of confusion, a lot of questions asking, you know, who would this policy apply to? Would it only be to people originally from Shanghai? Would it include people from other provinces or other cities who are living in Shanghai? At the same time, the business community in Taiwan, the tourism business community anyway, did seem to be showing some excitement about this. Several Taiwanese tour companies actually saw their stock price jump nearly 10% on the news that these tour groups might be coming back to Taiwan. So we're all just waiting to see what this policy will look like if it ever actually goes into effect.
And what about the trip by former President Ma? Did the MAC address that?
Yes, they did address this issue directly, and here's what they had to say.
马英九前总统有他自己的行动自由，那他现在也是解除了管制啊，那所以他到大陆，我们还是希望说，作为前总统啊，到大陆还是不能够伤害台湾的地位和国格啊，这是我们的希望啊。
Now, this kind of response from the MAC is not unusual for Ma's trips to China, which he makes nearly every year. So it seems that they're not expecting any new controversies this time around either. Eric?
Thanks for that, Chris. Now, it's Chris Gorn reporting live from the Mainland Affairs Council. Nominees to fill 7 seats in Taiwan's top court are being grilled by opposition lawmakers over their stance on the death penalty. Capital punishment hit the headlines here in Taiwan last week after a court commuted a death sentence, triggering outrage among victims' families. Tiffany Wong reports.
Families of victims of serious crimes still in mourning years. They say upholding the death sentences of the perpetrators is the only way they can see justice. But they're worried that a recent constitutional ruling limiting its use may never see the offenders punished.
我特地带来了我太太 见证现场的小包包，我现在都还保留着。你认为说死刑是合宪，可是你判出来的结果让底下各级的法官没有办法独立审判，让他无法执行死刑，自己就做了违宪的做法。
还要有多少难过的家庭？我们今天在这里还不够吗？宪判8的这个判决啊，其实是不只是关乎于被害人家属，它要带来的后果其实是全体国民要一起承担的。
The death penalty is one of the most controversial issues in Taiwan, and many lawmakers and citizens alike still strongly support the punishment. But in September, the Constitutional Court ruled that the death penalty was only allowed in exceptional cases. A poll published by a think tank founded by a KMT legislator showed over 80% of people disagree with the court's ruling. And now, 7 justice nominees picked by President Ma Ying-jeou are under fire as they undergo confirmation hearings in the opposition-controlled legislature. One nominee, a law professor at the country's top university, was grilled over her response to whether she agreed with the court's ruling.
全体的国民没有权利知道你在这个重大的基本人权保障的议题上面的想法吗？
全体人民跟大院都有权利知道我在这个议题的想法。
所以你的想法是什么？这个议题
的想法就是我们应该要尊重宪法法庭的裁判。
没有错。除了这个以外呢？
除了这个以外，我们不能表示任何的意见。
Other nominees said that restricting the scope of the death penalty doesn't mean that it won't be used, and acknowledged that justices would still have to address concerns about capital punishment in the future.
以从国际人权条约的发展来看的话，它大概是分为2个阶段，一个社会的脉动慢慢从把它限缩到比较小的严谨的范围。那我相信台湾的社会目前为止刚好处于的第一个阶段。那它可能未来在第2个阶段是否要进行到废除死刑的话，应该可以透过社会更多的互动。
The 7 justice nominees will need to pass this review by the legislature, where the opposition Kuomintang and Taiwan People's Party have a combined majority if they want to get a seat on that court. The legislature is set to vote to confirm the justices on December 24th, but with political divisions and no consensus on the thorny issue of the death penalty, the future of the court remains in limbo. Ryan Wu and Tiffany Wong in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
A city government official from the ruling Democratic Progressive Party has been detained on corruption charges. Keelung City Councilor Zhang Haohan is accused of having his assistant report false salaries and of falsely reporting his mother as one of his staffers. Both Zhang and his secretary pleaded guilty to the charges and returned their illegal earnings of about $24,000 US. Labor rights activists have gathered in Taipei to call on the new labor minister to do more to protect the country's migrant workers. Taiwan is home to over 700,000 migrant workers, but many of them face discrimination and a system that has left them saddled with debt. Rick Lau reports.
It's International Migrants Day, and here in Taiwan, outside the country's Labour Ministry, rights activists and migrant workers are gathering to urge the government to do more to protect the country's migrant workers. Taiwan has more than 700,000 migrant workers, mainly from Southeast Asia, and they work as caregivers in factories and in the country's fishing industry. But significantly, they are not afforded the same rights and protections as other workers in Taiwan.
Domestic worker rates are less than 70% of the minimum wage, and we have no day off. We stay in our employer's home 24 hours a day, either working on our standby, which severely affects our physical and mental health.
Among the demands from protesters here is that migrant workers should be allowed to change and choose jobs themselves without having to go through a broker. They're also saying that the government should do away with limits on how long migrant workers can live and work in Taiwan. Taiwan has a new Labour Minister, Hong Shun-han, and when he was a lawmaker, he championed migrant workers' rights. Protesters here saying that now he is in charge, he should start making the changes he demanded in the past. Justin Wu and Rick Lowett in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
To find out more about the policies on migrant labor here in Taiwan and what the government can do to improve conditions for them, Alec McDonald spoke to Professor Yi-Chun Chen of National Zhenzi University.
Professor Yi-Chun Chen, today is International Migrant Workers Day, and labor activists are protesting in Taipei. What sort of conditions are migrant workers facing in Taiwan?
We have implemented migrant worker policies since 1992, so it's almost more than 30 years now. And the common conditions they are facing right now, we have this private kind of market system. We don't recruit like in South Korea. So usually, when one migrant worker is coming to Taiwan, they have to go through specific agency or specific brokers to have the connection to the specific employers. So they are in a way, very vulnerable to that specific employers. A lot of times they are facing very abusive working environments. They are facing sexual assaults at private households. Those are the conditions that the government and the police are really hard to detect and very hard to find out. So those are the very vulnerable position and situation they are facing.
What lies behind Taiwan's two-tiered system where migrant workers and other white-collar workers have different rights when they come to work in Taiwan, and how does the government defend these kinds of policies?
So this is a very good question about two-tier system. And I think it doesn't really only exist in Taiwan. It actually exists globally in every country. So we have different policy to recruit high-skilled workers versus low to unskilled workers. Those are the jobs that we usually call 3D jobs, dangerous, difficult, and also those are the kind of jobs that local Chinese workers would not want to take on those jobs. We need those workers to come, but we actually don't want them to come. So in a way, we kind of, and from the economic perspective, there is a very famous argument about numbers versus rights. So for low skill or unskilled workers, if we want to recruit a big number, a huge amount of them, and that's big in number, then we provide very little in the rights.
The new Labour Minister, Hong Soon-han, has long been a champion of improved conditions and recognizing the human rights of migrant workers. What sort of policies can he and the government initiate to improve upon these conditions?
There are a lot of things that government can do. For example, as I mentioned earlier, migrant care workers are still excluded from Labor Standard Act, whereas the rest of the migrant workers are protected under Labor Standard Act. The second thing is that currently in Taiwan, migrant workers are facing a hard time to change the employer. So when they came to Taiwan and they found they don't like the working environment, there are some things they don't like. In Taiwan, if you're a local citizen, if you don't like your working environment, you can just quit, right? You can find another new job. But if you're migrant workers, you cannot do that. Currently, we ask them to have the approval of the current employer, which is really hard because they have the problem, labor disputes are happening. So it's really hard for the workers to have the current employer's approval to transfer the employer. So hopefully in the future, under the current new minister, we can try to work on the policy to make it easier for the migrant workers to change the employer.
That was Professor Yi-Tsun Qian from National Zhenzi University. Taiwan's Global Wafers has secured over $400 million in subsidies from Washington. The prominent maker of silicon semiconductor wafers is set to significantly increase its production in the states of Texas and Missouri. The grant comes from U.S. President Joe Biden's Signature CHIPS Act, which aims to spur U.S.-made semiconductors, seen as critical for national security. Currently, about 90% of silicon wafers are produced in East Asia. Stay tuned to TaiwanPlus. Coming up after the break, Ukraine claims responsibility for killing one of Russia's top generals in Moscow, and Russia vows retaliation.
I want competition with China, not conflict.
The entire world has great interest in keeping Taiwan's chip industry functional.
So the silicon shield that supposedly has been protecting Taiwan.
How many years the TSMC can still maintain its competitive edge?
What do you see as the next big shift in the semiconductor industry?
Taiwan's take on global headlines. All that matters, TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Ukraine's spy agency is claiming responsibility for the assassination of a high-ranking Russian general in Moscow. Russian investigators say an explosive device was hidden in a scooter outside an apartment building and was detonated remotely. Rosie Greninger reports.
This is the moment an explosion claimed the life of one of Russia's top generals, Igor Kirillov, and his assistant in Moscow. The blast occurring outside a residential apartment building, just a few blocks away from the Kremlin.
Я его знала только по СМИ. А что он проживал у нас в подъезде, я, конечно, не знала. А по телевидению-то мы его видели.
Lieutenant General Kirillov oversaw Russia's chemical and biological weapons unit. An anonymous official from the SBU, Ukraine's top spy agency, says they are behind the assassination. It comes just one day after the organization released a warrant for Kirillov's arrest over alleged war crimes, including the use of a banned chemical weapon. He was also sanctioned by several countries, including the UK and Canada, for his actions in Moscow's war against Ukraine. Russian investigators say a bomb was planted inside a scooter and detonated remotely as Kirillov exited the building.
На месте происшествия работает следственно-оперативная группа, устанавливаются обстоятельства преступления и круг лиц, причастных к их совершению.
as investigators attempt to get a clear picture of how this attack unfolded. What's become evident is that the brazen killing has undermined Russia's ability to project itself as unassailable. There was no security at the apartment, and Kirillov has become the most senior military officer to be killed inside Russia by Ukraine. Labeling it an act of terror, the Kremlin is vowing retaliation for his death.
Но в любом случае правоохранительные органы должны найти убийц в России, и нужно сделать все, чтобы уничтожить заказчиков, которые находятся в Киеве.
The assassination is not expected to change the course of Russia's almost 3-year invasion of Ukraine. But as Kiev demonstrates it can reach inside Moscow to successfully target senior officials, it is raising questions about the Kremlin's vulnerabilities. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
South Korea's foreign minister says the country wants to restore its credibility and standing. The nation was plunged into crisis when now impeached President Yoon suddenly declared martial law early this month.
우리 정부는 굳건한 한미 동맹을 바탕으로 빈틈없는 안보 태세를 확립하고 있습니다. 한반도 정세를 안정적으로 관리해 나가면서
Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yul said that he has spoken with U.S. President Joe Biden, who expressed confidence in South Korea's democratic resilience and support for the two countries' alliance. Cho said Seoul is preparing itself for the possibility that talks between North Korea and the U.S. could resume once U.S. President-elect Donald Trump takes office. The Pacific island nation of Vanuatu is reeling after a magnitude 7.3 quake struck on Tuesday, killing at least 14 people. More than 200 people were injured. The tremor hit just 30 kilometers from the country's capital and toppled buildings, caused landslides, and knocked out internet and phone services. Crowds of people have gathered outside hospitals seeking treatment. A Japanese space startup's second attempt to launch a rocket carrying satellites has failed. Attempting to become Japan's first company to put a satellite into orbit, Space One aborted its Kairos rocket flight 10 minutes after takeoff. It said the flight was unlikely to complete its mission. The cause of the failure remains unknown. The setback follows a March launch when the company's debut flight exploded 5 seconds after liftoff. Its payload included a government satellite meant to monitor North Korean military activity. In Taipei, an iconic traditional stir-fry spot is closing for good. For decades, Cai's restaurant was famous for its classic local flavors, but also as a secret hideout for political dissidents. Joyce Tseng visited the restaurant in its final days.
Opening the doors one last time, owner Yang Xiaoxia is preparing to clear everything out of Cai's restaurant, once a legendary stir-fry joint in Taipei. After 33 years, it's had its last day of service. Cai was a local favorite through the 1990s, a time of transition for Taiwan from brutal martial law to democracy. The place was founded by video journalist Yu Yueshu, who wanted a drinking spot for his friends, later selling it to Yang's husband, Liu Jianhua or Ahua, the restaurant's cook turned second owner. Yang, who goes by Hua Sao, says it was her husband who gave the place its glory.
解严以后，那时候是很乱，但是就是那种你在那个地方去，我们可以高谈阔论的时候，那个自由感，让大家觉得很放松。
That freedom helps the joint become the gathering spot for pro-democracy activists, pulling in patrons like Chen Shui-bian, Taiwan's first president from the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, that ended the Kuomintang's over 5-decade rule. Other figures known to have dined at the spot include Shi Mingde, the late democracy activist known as Taiwan's Mandela, and more recently, DPP figures Enoch Wu and Freddie Lim. After Ahua died from cancer in 2020, Hua Sao says it's been tough, and so she's decided to close for good.
曾经有听人说，也是我的客人，他说，没有阿华老板在的地方就不像阿财店。最主要的也是成本压力，还有就是最大原因就是我的那个厨师儿子，他身体出了一些状况。
Hua Sao's grateful that up until the last service, customers enjoyed the Taiwanese home cooking and even played traditional games. For its final days, Hua Sao has turned the space into a photo exhibit for patrons to enjoy the atmosphere one last time. For the past 3 decades, this restaurant has also been home to many relics that are quintessentially Taiwanese, like these hand-painted movie posters and also this vintage bottle cap sign for Heisong root beer that the owner is actually putting up for auction starting at almost $2,000 US. And that's not all. Everything here is up for sale, a final draw for the restaurant's longtime customers and fans, some even discovering treasures with a personal connection.
比较意外就是有看到父亲的一套全集啊。以时间来讲的话，就这阿财的店的历史应该是会跟我父亲这个在同一个年代这样。
我很喜欢这种台湾啤酒的小酒杯，因为我觉得这个就是很 very Taiwanese style 的。 然后这也是一个非常值得纪念的物品，然后也是代表着这间店的一些历史吧。
Hua Sao says it was a group of longtime customers who proposed and organized the auction.
It's kind of we are preserved everything and want to pass on the memories.
For Hua Sao, letting go of the restaurant means allowing it to reunite with her husband, the soul of a place that brought people together during some of Taiwan's darkest times. Chris Ma and Joyce Sin for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for joining us today here on TaiwanPlus News. Before we go, we take you to Rome for a sneak peek at the reopening of Emperor Nero's refurbished Golden Palace, featuring a new entrance and previously inaccessible rooms. I'm Eric Gao. Have a good evening, and we'll see you later.